The stock market is like the weather, right? Summer always comes again, but there's gonna be storms. And if you're not prepared for it, we got to figure out if your retirement can survive the storm, right? So the myth that we're going to talk about today is market averages don't equal real life outcomes, right? Because the market is going to go up and going to go down, right? Over time, that the S&P 500 has averaged in that 8 to 11% range, depending on what years you're looking at. But there's always big downturns, right? And so, go clear back to the year 2000, 2008, 2020, shoot, the market got cut in half almost in those three different scenarios. And the thing is that like retirees no longer have time to recover from those big market downturns. And the reason that we need to think about this is because when the market goes down and you have to take money out the same time to live on, that can kind of get ugly in a hurry. So I want to reiterate, average returns in the stock market is going to make it look like it always goes up. And over time, it does. The problem is it's like the weather. Storms are going to come. There's going to be big drops in the market. And if you're relying on those dollars to live on and you're taking money out at the same time, it can kind of get ugly in a hurry. So when we think about this, I would like to show you two different examples, right? And so there's this big fancy word. It's called sequence of returns. And in my opinion, it's the silent killer of any good financial plan. But I don't think a lot of people understand what sequence of returns is for two reasons. One, big fancy word that a lot of people like me try to use to sound smarter than we really are. And the other reason is it's kind of, you don't really know about it. You don't really know what's happening unless you put time or effort in to educate yourself like you are today. And so instead of saying sequence of returns, I always replace that with you don't want to be a forced seller in a down market. You don't want the market taking it away from you the same time you're taking it out to live on, because that can get ugly in a hurry. So two different examples, side-by-side comparison here. That's going to show us what being a forced seller in a down market or sequence of returns can do. So we're going to go with Mrs. Green and Mrs. Red. And yes, I came up with those names on my own. So two scenarios here. They're both 65 years old and they both have $1 million that they can use to live on. So we're 65 years old, we've got $1 million in these two different scenarios, all right? Now we're gonna turn 66 and we're gonna have to start taking money out to live on. Why are we gonna do that? Well, because we've retired and we've got an income gap and we gotta start taking that money out to live on. So let's say we gotta take $40,000 a year out, all right? So we're 66 in both scenarios, you'll see here, and we've got $1 million and now we're starting to take $40,000 a year out. And we're gonna do that every year until age 90. All right, so we go from $1 million at 65 to taking $40,000 a year out every year until age 90. And then down there at the bottom, in the dark blue line, it says in both cases, the average annual rate of return is 7.32%. All right, so how much money does Mrs. Green have at the end of that 90 years, right? She's got $2.8 million. But on the other hand, Mrs. Red only has $400 and some thousand. How can that be? Everything's the exact same in both scenarios. We both are 65. We both have $1 million. We both are taking $40,000 a year out to live on. We're doing that all the way through the age of 90. Yet there's almost, there's $2 million worth of difference in those scenarios with the same average rate of return. And the difference here is, if you stare at it long enough, you'll realize the annual rates of return are simply inverted, right? And so we get the same average, but the outcome is literally dramatically different to the tune of millions of dollars. All right, and the difference here is that Mrs. Red was a forced seller in a down market, but here's the thing with Mrs. Red. She was a forced seller in a down market right out of the gates. Those first few years for her were really big negative years, where the first few years for Mrs. Green were positive years. And towards the end with Mrs. Green, that's where her big negative years came in, whereas the big positive years for Mrs. Red came in towards the end, but there wasn't near as much money for it to impact. So you can't be a forced seller in a down market Retirees no longer, or you don't have time to recover like maybe you did at one point in time. Don't forget about sequence of returns. If you don't understand how much risk you have inside of your accounts, if you don't know if you're a forced seller or not, we need to run a stress test on your portfolio and decide, hey, are you a forced seller in down market? How much risk do I have? And it's pretty easy. We can run that stress test and we can score you out on a scale from 1 to 99. 1's like cash in the bank. 99 is as risky as you can get. All right, so run a stress test on your portfolio, figure out where you are at on that risk scale, understand if you're a forced seller in a down market or not. That's one of the big takeaways from today. Then from there, hey, what if we are a forced seller in a down market? Okay, well, let's think about how do we fix that problem. And you know me, I always go back to our retirement blueprint or our home that we're building, right? And I think about it in 3 different sections, right? The foundation of our home is our safe bucket of money, all right? The foundation of our home, say we have $1 million, for example. The foundation of the home needs to be principal protected, and it needs to get reasonable rates of return. Now, of our $1 million, I don't know how much of that million should be in the foundation. That's something that's personal and individualized to your situation. But I know that if we're pulling money out to live on, we need some money in the foundation of our home that we can't lose on, so it's principal protected, and we can get reasonable rates of return on, right? And so we need some dollars in that bucket. There are all kinds of different tools that we can use in the foundation of our home. It can be things like CDs, treasury bills, annuities, money market accounts, different things like that. The list goes on and on. Principal protected, reasonable rates of return. That's our goal. We need enough money in the foundation of our home for us to be able to pull from and live off of for years, right? Because historically, when the market takes a big dive, right, like in 2000 or 08 or 2020, it can take years for it to come back. And so we need to have enough money to get from point A to point B and avoid that big dip in the market and be able to pull from that foundation of our home and get from point A to point B. All right. The rest of our dollars, they can have some risk to them, right? So maybe the walls of our home. The walls of our home are going to be maybe a little more actively managed, right? Maybe we're going to buy and sell inside of the walls of our home to kind of insulate ourselves from the big drops in the market. Here's where I think we think differently. When it comes to the walls of our home, we're not trying to beat the market, all right? People cannot beat the market on a consistent basis. Sure, we might get lucky here and there, but consistently it's not going to happen. And so the walls of our home, we're not trying to beat the market. We're trying to smooth out the ride. So maybe we're going to be a little more active or a little more tactical with the money in the walls of our home. Maybe this is money you're going to use in 5 to 10 years and we can't take big, massive losses in there. It's going to kind of insulate ourselves from those big drops in the market. But then the roof of our home, that's where we can take some risk, right? Like that's money we may not need in our lifetime. Maybe that's money going to the next generation, or it's going to be a long time before we need that money. We can take some risk with those dollars. We can be a little more passive. We can go buy those individual stocks or ETFs or whatever it is, right? All kinds of different tools we can use in each one of those sections of the home. But I think it's great to kind of bucket the strategy out in 3 different buckets and understand that we've got to have a strategy, something like that, to where we're not a forced seller in a down market, and that if we get into a time where the market is down, again, we're not having to take money out when the market's down to live on. All right, so key takeaways. 1, are you a forced seller in a down market or not? All right, that's what you've got to figure out. Of your assets, what percentage of them are at risk to the market, right? If the answer is 100% of them and you're taking money out to live on, at some point in time, you will be a forced seller in a down market, because we all know markets go up and markets go down. If 100% of your assets are at risk to the market, there's a time, I'm sure at some point, I don't know when, but you will be a forced seller in a down market. The other thing I would take away is I don't think a lot of people understand how much risk they have. So let's stress test your portfolio, right? There's all kinds of different ways you can do that. If you want us to do it for you, great. We'd be happy to do that for you, but you don't necessarily have to have us to do it. Find out how much risk you have inside of your accounts. I like to think about it on a scale from 1 to 99. Think about it like a speed limit sign. 1, going 1 mile an hour down the road, probably not a lot going to go wrong. But if you're going 99 miles an hour down the road, things can get dicey in a hurry. So if you need to stress test your portfolio and you need help with that, obviously reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you do that. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that we can continue to upload this content and help educate retirees and pre-retirees to plan for 30 years of retirement unemployment. We'll see you next time.